Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you all to Helping Kids Manage Stress and Anxiety. My name is April, and I will be your Zoom host today. This program is presented as part of our Free Hope series, Healing Online for People Everywhere, which we created in 2020 at the start of the pandemic to support the resilience of our global community through social emotional arts. We would like to begin by acknowledging the Tongva Nation, on whose land the city of Los Angeles, where we are based, rests today. We hold respect and gratitude for the Tongva people who still consider themselves the caretakers of this land. By their example, we are reminded of our responsibility to our planet and to one another. Let's take a moment in our own way to honor the Indigenous communities of past and present on whose land you are joining from today. Today's program is in a meeting format, so please keep yourself muted until prompted otherwise. We suggest that you stay on gallery view throughout the session, and to help with efficiency, please use the digital hand raise function when prompted for questions and comments. If you have the latest version of Zoom installed, the raise hand button is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen under Reactions. You can also find it by clicking on the Participants button at the bottom. Then, in that window, click Raise Hand. We invite you to add your pronouns to your name. You can keep your camera on or off for your comfort level. There will be a 15-minute Q&A at the end of this program. Let's welcome today's presenter, Erica Curtis. Erica is an award-winning author of The Innovative Parent, Raising Connected, Happy, Successful Kids Through Art, a marriage and family therapist and board-certified art therapist. Erica is an instructor and curriculum developer for UCLA Arts and Healing. She consults for the Board of Behavioral Sciences, Loyola Marymount University, the Foundation for Art and Healing, and others. Erica is an internationally sought speaker and has been cited in over 100 media outlets as an expert on creative approaches to psychological, relational, and emotional health. Past president of the Southern California Art Therapy Association and past board member of the ADA. Erica maintains a practice in San Juan Capistrano. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Erica.
Thanks so much, April. I'm so glad to be with you this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are Zooming in from, or maybe even evening. So wonderful to see familiar faces. Thank you for all of you to join me today. I especially was noticing as people were coming, I was like, oh, I recognize that face. I recognize that face. So if you recognize mine as well, hello. I wanted to start with a story, actually, before I put up my PowerPoint. This last year has just been such a time warp for me, and I think for so many people, that when I was thinking about this presentation this morning, I thought, my goodness, the story I'm about to tell actually happened probably exactly 1 year ago today, right? And so it was soon after things had locked down, schools had closed, the kids were at home. I have 3 children. They are now 5, 8, and 11. And so we were all working from home, had my kids here. My oldest two, my oldest son and my daughter, they were arguing in the other room. My husband was trying to get work done. I was probably trying to get work done, and we were probably tag teaming, trying to cook and get things taken care of. And my 5-year-old, 4 at the time, I look in the other room and he's climbing a bookshelf, right? So you could just sort of imagine, I don't know if any of you can relate to this scene, perhaps. Yes, good, thank you. I'm not alone, thank you. I saw some head nods there. Right, so I got my arguing kids, I've got a kid climbing a bookshelf, and I had a couple options in that moment, right? I could go and deal with the fire over here. I could deal with the fire over there. I could just stand and say, everybody stop, calm down, which, as we know, is not effective, right? So what I decided to do is I went to the easiest and maybe the most dangerous at the time, now that I think about it. But for me in the moment, it was just the easiest, which was my son climbing the bookshelf. Right. And so I let the other 2 keep arguing. I went to my little one and I said, what do you need? And he said, I'm trying to get paper, because there was paper up on the top shelf. And I said, you know what? I think that's what we all need. And I had a stroke of insight and I thought, okay, everybody, we need to draw. And so I grabbed some paper and I went to the dining room table, and my 11-year-old, 10 at the time, he was like, I know what you're trying to do, mom, right? Because now they're kind of like used to my sort of creative interventions. And so he likes to try to resist it because he's like, I know you're trying to make us feel better. Like, I'm not going to feel better, right? And so that's my 11-year-old. And my 4-year-old, he's very happy because this is what he wanted. So he comes and he sits down, and I call family drawing time. And so family drawing time in our family is when we do a nonverbal drawing together. All right. And so the paper gets passed around the group and everybody takes a turn adding to the drawing, and you can add a detail or a shape, but you don't get to talk at all, which is really nice for me as a parent because then everybody stops fighting, right? But we can start to communicate on the paper. And so my daughter was like, I'm in. So she comes over, breaks the disagreement or the argument that she's in with her brother, comes over, sits down. And now that me and my two younger ones are starting to do this family drawing, then of course my 11-year-old is now feeling left out. So he's like, fine. So he comes over and he sits down. And next thing you know, we're all laughing and the drawing's starting to kind of come into something. And I'm going to show you that drawing right now. It does take a moment sometimes for my PowerPoint to wake up. So just so you know, when I jump from PowerPoint to the video view, the grid, it might just take a moment. All right. Okay, so here was our drawing that the four of us created together, and it emerged into this very silly drawing. And then once we felt like it was done, then I said, okay, everybody, let's come up with a title. We titled it, we're feeling more connected. And then what I do is I circle back to my son, my oldest son and my daughter and say, so what was happening before? What was going on, guys, right? But now they're in a very regulated and connected place. They're feeling much calmer. And so now we can communicate and start to problem solve to figure out what had happened just moments before. Okay, this is an adaptation online that I wanted to show you because a lot of us are still functioning online in various capacities, whether you're a teacher or a counselor or a grandparent or other family member that might be Zooming online or using other FaceTiming or other sort of formats online to communicate with children in your life, that we can do this online as well. This is actually using the Zoom program. They have a shared whiteboard on Zoom that you can pop up and you can draw on it together. So this was actually the spring cohort of UCLA Arts and Healing Social Emotional Arts Certificate Training Program. And this was two of the attendees who created this nonverbal drawing together and emerged into this picture. And then once they were finished, they titled it Love in the Time of Social Distance. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why art and how it can be so very effective when we are experiencing or children are experiencing stress responses, including anxiety, which we're going to talk about today as well. That also might look like anger, it might look like depression or just sadness, and also traumatic responses. So in situations, if you have children or are working with children, I think that trauma, more and more, we're looking at it more broadly, that a lot of us have experienced various degrees of trauma in our lives, even over this past year because of the various situations that have impacted our lives. So we can think of trauma very broadly, and that trauma is really a response in the body and the mind to events around us, where it can be difficult to digest that information because it's so emotionally impactful. That the mind holds on to it, thinking that it needs it for survival, right? And so that's when we can start with children to see more behavioral problems or behavioral responses, acting inwards or acting outwards. So wanting to think in terms of any challenging behavior that we're seeing with children is really underneath some sort of difficulty with regulating their response to what's happening inside and outside of them, okay? So when a child or an adult experiences stress, reaction, the fear center activity in the brain increases. So the amygdala gets very activated. It's trying to protect us in that moment. And it starts to send signals to the body that says, okay, we better protect this body. We better fight it off. We better run away. Or maybe we even numb out because fighting or running away isn't possible. Now, on a day-to-day basis, that might look like it's time to do homework, right? The brain does not differentiate, especially in children, between a tiger being about to eat you and it's time to log on for your Zoom class, right? If the amygdala assesses that there is a threat, it will kick into high gear. Now, remember with children that the cortex is not fully developed. That's the thinking, planning part of the brain. So children are already working with sort of a limited ability to access thought and problem solving and to communicate with the emotional part of the brain. So that emotional part of the brain gets very active and it is starting to run the show in that moment. Meanwhile, what happens is our brain's ability to think, access language internally to speak, but also to hear and process language, it tanks. Okay, our ability to learn and pay attention in that moment decreases, and our ability to regulate our emotions decreases because that requires the thinking brain, the cortex, to communicate with the feeling brain. So kids are already challenged at this skill of the thinking brain talking to the feeling brain. Under stress, it's even further impaired. So this is where the arts come in, okay? Because if the brain is not able to process verbal information and it's hard to problem solve and think clearly, and it's hard to access their own language, talking to kids when they are stressed out makes no sense. Okay, that does not mean that we want to get rid of talking altogether, but limiting our verbal communication, at least during the process of trying to help them come into a more regulated state, and using more sensory experiences that we can access through the various creative arts is really the most effective and efficient way to help kids to get back into a state where their minds and their bodies are regulated and they can then problem solve after that. Okay. So here's just a quick little view of that fight, flight, freeze response that I mentioned a moment ago. So we have this beautiful zone of regulation in the middle where almost everything is rainbows and sunshine, right? We don't really just stay like hardcore right in the center there. We kind of do this, right? But this is what we would like. We'd like to see kind of riding that zone of regulation there, okay? But when kids and adults, and I add and adults because one of the triggers for adults often is dysregulated children. So kids get dysregulated, we get dysregulated, and now we're all in our feeling brains and having a hard time getting back into a state of regulation where we can think clearly and problem solve. So I'm going to talk towards the end of this presentation about things that we can do for ourselves as adults to help stay in that zone or regulation or get back into it when we need to. So what I'm going to focus on today, specifically in terms of calming stress and anxiety responses in children, is this notion of calm. Okay, so why art? So one thing that you can think about is this acronym. So C is for containing emotions. So the physical paper, the movement, the sound that we can produce through music or singing or rhythm by banging on a pot with a wooden spoon, for example, that form becomes the containment for the feeling. Okay, so we can use the arts to contain emotions. And I'm going to give you a more specific example that you'll get to try in just a moment. A is for altering images. So once we take an experience that's inside and put it outside of us, which we call externalizing. So we externalize an internal experience. Now the child can see it. Now we have a tangible form that we can do something. Feelings are really hard to, even in adults, they're kind of like, they're just these bodily experiences with thoughts that come along with them. And it's really hard sometimes to even know what they are. to know what to do with them other than distract ourselves from them, which is kind of our go-to in our society, is just to distract kids from their feelings, distract ourselves from our feelings, bribe kids out of their feelings, right? But once we're able to externalize our feelings, now we have an object that we can work with. So we're going to talk a little bit more about altering images to alter feelings. L is to let go. It allows us to let go and to laugh. As I told you the story a little bit earlier about my family sitting down to do that family drawing, one of the big keys, and that was not only that we were nonverbal and doing a shared experience, but we started to laugh, right? And so through that laughter, we were able to release some of that tension, let go of those conflicts, those conflictual emotions, and come back together. And then M is to be mindful, that the arts in various ways allow us to be mindful, but that we can also use the art in very targeted, specific ways in order to enhance its inherent mindfulness qualities. And I'm going to give you some examples of that later. Okay, enough of me talking. Let's make some art. So what I'm going to invite you to do right now, if you haven't already, grab a piece of paper and some markers, or if you are near a desk drawer, a pencil and a Post-it note would be fine. So anything you can draw or write with, and anything that you could draw or write on. It can be the back of a newspaper if you want to, okay? It's got to be quick and easy, right? Especially when we're doing this at home with children. No fancy materials required. Okay, now what I'm going to do is invite you to create a shape. You can trace your hand if you would like to. And you can draw some other kind of shape you see up here on the screen that I have traced hands as an example. Whoops, didn't mean to progress. I was trying to move my grid. Let me stop share. Okay. All right, and now there's several different ways to do this activity, but what I'm going to invite you to do right now is to think of something vaguely stressful. Nothing that's going to be like a 10 out of 10 on a 10-point scale, right? We're not doing group therapy today. So something's kind of mild, something that if you think about it right now, it can be past or present or even coming up in the future. That brings up maybe like the 4 on a 10-point scale in terms of like, oh yeah, that's kind of stressful. I've got this deadline coming up, or oh, somebody's coming to visit this week and that's kind of stressful, or I've got a busy day tomorrow. Okay, so think of something a little bit stressful. Or maybe you want to think a child in your life right now who activates some of your stress level. Okay, and then I'm going to invite you to start doodling inside of your shape. Okay. So you're going to start to just whatever comes, line, shapes, colors. If you'd like to break the shape up a little bit more, you can add some squiggle lines to break that shape up a little bit more, and then start to doodle inside of each of those shapes. And you can doodle specifically sort of, I call this like a doodle dump, if you want to create shapes or symbols or doodles that say something about the stress, or just whatever comes to mind. It doesn't need to be planned out. And we're going to take just a couple moments here to really give yourself the opportunity to experience this. Now, of course, this activity could go on for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or even longer if you wanted to, but you could do it really quickly as well. And then if you would like to, just as an addition to this activity, so we can sort of layer, and now you can do this, and now you can add this. So as an option, if you would like to, think about things now that kind of support you. Think about things that give you a sense of ease in your life. Okay, and then you can doodle that outside of the shape. So if you traced your hand, for example, you might doodle that around the hand. Things that give you a sense of ease. Now, again, you can be very specific in terms of your doodles, that they might be representative of those things, or they can just be random doodles that come to you as you think about things or people or situations around you or in your life that give you a sense of ease. Okay, we're just going to take 1 or 2 more moments, and then I'm going to ask for a volunteer. Somebody would be willing to share their piece with the group, and the rest of you, I would invite you to add 1, 2, or 3 words to the chat box about what that process was like for you, what the process was like for you, okay? So you can continue to doodle if you feel like, wait, I'm not done, feel free to continue. You can doodle through this whole workshop if you want to, that's fine. Some people actually listen better or pay attention better if they're doodling. So feel free to continue doodling if you're still doodling. Otherwise, please start to add 1, 2, or 3 words into the chat box. And I'm going to start to read some of those. All right, I see soothing, calming, the breathing slowed and calmed down. Thank you. Usually in the chat bar, I'll get like 1 or 2, and then they go, oh, see, here they come. And I have to scroll back up to the top. Let's see here. Focused, aroused curiosity. Yes. Allowed my mind to stop. Focus increased, mindful quieting, present in the moment. My focus shifted. Focus was intentional, reflective. Was trying to think of a 4 on the stress scale is hard. Yes, the 9s and 10s come to mind much more. And not that you can't, it's just of course in a, you know, and as we do any of these activities, if you want to, and you feel like a well-resourced individual that is not gonna, right? It's just, of course, in a large context with this, that I don't want to bring up anything inside of something that's not going to then feel resolved and contained. Because if we start working on stresses at a 9 or 10 level, sometimes it can be harder to contain those in a short amount of time. At first, overthinking, then feeling present. Yeah, so noticing some shifts, restful, focus, overthinking of an upcoming exam and drawing made me calm down. Focus, mindful, creative, clarifying, appreciate having the visual representation of the container for the stress within the shape. Ah, ooh, let's all do that one together real quick. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Ah, yeah. Good. Taking a deep breath for a lot of people can be very difficult, especially with anxiety. We ask children with anxiety to take a deep breath. Anxiety often lives here. If you ask children and adults, where do they notice their anxiety? It's usually here. So to ask people to focus on their breath can actually create more anxiety. Or they might notice that they're not breathing deeply, and that can feel very uncomfortable and create more anxiety. And so again, using some sort of like a resonant sound such as, ah, right, can activate that same system that calms the body as taking a deep breath. Because with the deep breath, really what's calming the body is that deep exhale, right? So we could even use different, now everybody do low. You want to, let's unmute. Let's do this together. Can everybody, if you'd like to, you can stay muted if you want to, but if you'd like to unmute, let's do a deep one. Okay, ready? We're going to do a deep one now. 1, 2, 3. And now let's do a higher one. 1, 2, 3. Lovely. Thank you. All right, relaxing. That was kind of impromptu. That was fun. And then just take a moment to check in with yourself, right? To see what shifted by making that sound. Some people notice more insights, reminding of needs to get outdoors, feeling optimistic, and to realize the ability to process through a stress. Yes, right? And so what this allows us to do, as many of you notice, is it allows us to make space for the stress instead of distracting from it. But now we can approach it because it's externalized, it's now an object, and it's contained within a shape, right? And so, and then we can resource around it when then we shift to those feelings of what brings us a more pleasant or at ease feeling, and both can exist on the page at the same time, right? So this is getting into some complicated stuff now. I'm doing a lot of layers here. But if you're working with children or you have children at home, just doing the first one alone, right? Draw a shape and let's just dump. Let's just doodle dump inside of that shape it's containing, okay? Can I have one volunteer to share their drawing with the group? Yes, for Veronique? Thank you. Yeah, and would you mind unmuting Veronique so I can ask you a little bit about it?
Yes.
Thank you, Veronique. So you don't have to talk specifically about the stress or what that was, but can you tell me a little bit about your process and what you're noticing in the drawing now?
I thought about like a monster, stress being a monster. So I start my shape with kind of an untrue animal. And then I thought using that animal to protect me against the same stress. So I add wings and some love and some flame to use that animal to protect me. So that's it.
Thank you. So you transformed, and this goes to the principle of A, right? Altering the image. So you were actually able to take the stress and transform the actual stress on the page.
Yes.
Yes, thank you for sharing. All right.
Nothing, my pleasure.
Yes, thank you. So you'll notice that what I did there in talking to Veronique, just very briefly about her, and I could have spent an hour with her talking about that, right? So when we're talking with children about their art, especially this type of art that we're talking about to communicate, art to decrease stress, art to help us understand our feelings, right? What I did not do with Veronique was, oh, look, you drew a horse, right? That's what I did not do. Right? I invited her merely to tell me about what you did. What was the process like, and what do you see now as you're looking at the paper, right? So inviting her to tell me her story, right? Not making any comments about how good the drawing is or what it looks like or how much I like it, right? Just simply staying with the meaning behind it for her. Okay, that's really important. Or else we can inadvertently, even with the best of intentions of being encouraging, inadvertently shut down communication. And if we make the wrong guess about what it's about, the child might just go along with us and go, oh yeah, right. This drawing on the right here, I actually did with one of my kids. I was getting ready for work. And so this was actually done with the child. So again, different variations of the same activity. Of course, my children were fully occupied when I was available. And as soon as they could sniff out that maybe I wasn't going to be available soon, it was like, zoom, right? Suddenly they needed a snack and they needed this and they needed that and da, 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 right? And so I said, okay, well, before I get in the shower, let's do a quick, this probably took 20 seconds, right? 30 seconds, maybe. I said, come here, let me show you something. Trace my hand, you trace your hand, right? Drew the little squiggles to break it up. Now we're going to fill in the doodles, and we started filling in the doodles. Okay, you keep working on that. I'm going to go get in the shower, right? And when I get home from work later, you can show me if you finished it. Okay, so it's a symbolic connection there, a symbolic and physical representation of our connection. Gave them a little, fill in the bucket of connection with the ability to then transition independently so that I could then go and take care of what I needed to. And this has come in very handy, this type of activity, especially working from home a lot this last year with the kids also being at home for school. Right. So art offers the important opportunity to explore boundaries between self-expression and self-containment. And boy, if there is not a primary task in life, I think that is it, right? I think that can sort of sum up raising children. How can they express their feelings without overwhelming themselves or others? How can they express their needs respectfully? How can they meet their body movement needs, their exploration needs, their curiosity needs, but in a way that's safe, in a way that's respectful of others, in a way that's respectful of property. So it's finding this boundary over and over again with children, and art is really an optimal place to experiment with that. Okay. So trying, like I said, to give a lot of different online adaptations as well. I have had people report to me that they've used the hand one online with that shared whiteboard where you can put your hand up and trace it and have the person on the other side put their hand on the screen and trace it using that shared whiteboard, and then you can doodle on it together. So really any of these activities can be translated into the online. If you have a classroom that you're Zooming with, you could have all of the children put their hands on that online whiteboard from wherever they're Zooming and trace their hand and have a communal piece. Or if you're back in the classroom, given that we can't, a lot of places are still not sharing materials or working in a close space, the kids can do hands, cut them out, and then you can paste them together on a larger board to show that sense of connection and community. So lots of ways to get creative and adapt these activities for various settings, okay? Another fun game that has to do with attunement and connection, and it can also sort of move into that place of more specifically addressing stress, which is if I were A, I'd be A, right? So if I were rain clouds, maybe I'm feeling rainy today. So we could even start with talking about feelings, right? What kind of weather are you feeling like today? Are you feeling sunny today, rainy today, snowy today? This would be better for younger kids, okay? I would be A, and so they could pair up with a friend or a sibling or with the parent, which is what would I want to offer that? Would I want to be a rain cloud with you? Would I want to be an umbrella for you? Would I want to be a flower blooming, right? And so this is a nice way to, again, talk about feelings and express stresses or anxieties. So if a child's feeling anxious, you can wonder, well, I wonder what kind of weather that would be, right? I wonder if that's feeling that says, I don't want to go back to school. I wonder what kind of, would that be like a rainy weather or a thundery weather or a stormy or a hurricane? And then in that playful way, like, hey, I know we can play a game with this, right? So you draw the weather and then I'm going to draw what I would be, right? And then we can take turns back and forth, and you can do this online as well. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about calming stress responses now. So one of the pieces to keep in mind that's important to teach children and for us to remind ourselves is that feelings are not us. Feelings just come and visit us, and we all have all the feelings inside of us. It's kind of like they live in the attic and then they come up into the living room. Right? And then they're going to hang out here until they're satisfied, and then they're going to go again, right? And then another feeling, or maybe 2 or 3 come at a time, and then they kind of come and hang out in our living room. And if we ignore them, they're probably not going to go away, right? Because feelings come with needs. And when we can start to personify feelings, and this is with all ages, certainly, like I said, even with adults, if we can personify feelings, meaning giving them some sort of a character or a form that has its own needs, has its own opinions about things, has its own wants and demands, right? That then what we allow the child to do is to separate themselves from that feeling. And now, again, that same principle of externalizing, it gives them more choices for how to interact with that feeling rather than just feeling the feeling, right? And so one thing that we can start by doing is asking children if stress or anxiety or whatever the feeling might be was a visitor, what would it look like? Okay, so I'm going to invite you all to do this activity right now. So you can use the same stressor you were thinking about before. You can pick a new one. Okay, Like I said, if you feel comfortable and safe working with a little bit higher level of stress, I do not want to, dampen your opportunity to work with that. Just know your limits. Okay. And you're going to ask yourself that question. If this stress or anxiety were a visitor, what would it look like? So go ahead and give it a color, shape, texture, or form. And sometimes it might just be a color. Sometimes people say, well, I don't know, or the child or adolescent might go, I don't know. That's at least how my 11 going on 16-year-old sounds. In my head, at least. I don't know. He probably would say that he doesn't actually sound like that, but my daughter would probably say that was a very good impression of him. So he might say, I don't know. And so I would respond with, that's okay, you don't need to know. It comes from a not knowing place. Okay, so I'm going to say that again. If a child says, I don't know, then we just reassure them that that's okay not to know, that it comes from a not knowing place. And what we might do then is to simply start with a color. Let's just start with a color. If that stress was a color, what color would it be? And then once we have a color, we can ask, okay, does it have a shape? And if they say, I don't know, you can say, that's okay. Does it seem like it has any edges? Is there some place where it stops? And often they will say yes. Okay, so once you have drawn some representation of your stress or anxiety, then we're going to look at the right-hand side of the screen here, and there's several prompting questions. So the first is, what does it tell you? What does this stress character tell you? Right, so now we're not going to be talking about the child. We're going to be talking about this drawing, right? That allows the child to get more into an observing stance of their own emotion, right? It's kind of like we can give advice to friends better than we can give advice to ourselves, right? Because it's not us. So once that stress is no longer us, now we can come up with some more information and get curious about it, right? So if we want to, we can even add a little voice bubble to it and see what it's saying. And then I might ask the child or invite you right now to reflect on whatever you've written. What is that stress or anxiety telling you? And ask yourself, is it true? Right? Not asking stress if it's true. Stress would be like, oh yeah, it's very true, right? But we can ask ourselves now, or ask the child if the child is doing it. Say, okay, so let's take a look at that. Is stress right? Is that true? Right? And is it completely true? If they say, well, yes, it is true. Okay. Right? What about it is true? Right? I have been co-coaching a little social emotional running club for my daughter. And one of the activities recently, they were drawing clouds and writing things that like dampen their day or like cloud out their day. And one girl wrote dreams. And so, and some of the other coaches were kind of like, oh, like she just tries to, be kind of like defiant and tries not to participate. And so I went over and I said, tell me about this. Tell me about dreams. How do dreams, and she said, I don't like good dreams. Because I said, well, what kind of dreams? Like good dreams, bad dreams, like dreams at night, dreams during the day? And she said, well, dreams at night. And I said, well, kind of dreams? She's like, good dreams or just regular dreams at night. I don't like dreams. They make me have feel bad. And I said, well, what about them make you feel bad? Like something in the dream? Or so just getting really curious about it. And then she said, because I wake up and I realize it's not true. Right. And so it can be, and that makes so much sense, right? Like you having like this lovely dream and then you wake up and you're like, oh man, like, oh, I'm back here again. Right. And so sometimes children will write something down and our brain will quickly interpret what it means, which is why it's so important to stay with it and get curious about it. Because if they write down something that stress says, like you're going to fail, for example, and we want to quickly reassure and the child, if we say, well, is that true? And the child says, yeah, that's true, I'm going to fail. right? We want to quickly reassure and say, well, no, you're not, right? So try to resist that and just stay with it and say, okay, so stress is telling you're going to fail the test. You're saying that that is true. You're going to fail the test. So what about that is true, right? Well, I failed the last one. Oh, so you're remembering that you failed the last one, right? And so then we can start working with that a little bit more. So the next question is, what does it need? What does stress need? Not what the child needs, what does stress need? We want to really keep separating stress from the child or anxiety from the child. Okay, so asking the child, what does this character need? And go ahead and ask yourself that now. What does your character need? And can you give it what it needs? So you can go ahead and add a drawing, whatever that might be. So go ahead and give your stress or anxiety what it needs now. And then whenever you're finished with that, I invite you again to use the chat bar box. I don't know what it's officially called. And write 1, 2, or 3 words in the chat box about what you noticed during that process. And in the meantime, I'll speak a little bit about this drawing here on the screen. So this was done by my oldest son. And he added, it is 4:55 in the morning. And this was his anxiety. He was worrying about something. This was his worry. And I said, well, I wonder what worry would look like. And so worry's knocking at his bedroom door. Here's him in his bedroom. And that's his bed there in the left-hand corner of the house that he drew. And that's him going, ah, inside the house. And worry's knocking at his door. So he had woken up he had actually woken up really early, was worrying about something. I was like, well, what are you worried about? And what's going on? And talk. And he's like, I don't know, Mom, I don't know. Right. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. Talking isn't super effective. So I said, well, I wonder what worry would look like. Right. Now, my kids are very versed in this. Like I said, my oldest one is starting to resist some of these, but he still enjoys them and he still responds to them. Sometimes people will ask me, well, what if my kid's not creative? What if I'm not artistic? What if my kids, aren't used to this? And even the surprise factor of it can be really beneficial. I think because my kids are so used to it, sometimes that makes it difficult because, like I said, they'll be like, oh yeah, I know what you're trying to do. And so I kind of have the opposite challenge sometimes with that. And I have to kind of get creative sometimes in different ways to approach it. But if a kid's never done it before, sometimes just the sheer fact that it's different will make them kind of curious and be like, what? Like, what? And that can even shock them out of whatever state they're in the moment. And if a child won't do it, or if my own kids won't engage, or even in my art therapy practice, if a kid was like, oh, I don't want to do it, I'm like, that's okay, you don't have to. And then I'll just start drawing something. And then they get curious. And then I go, well, what do you think? Kind of like this? And they go, no, Erica, not like that, like this. And then they take the paper and then they start adding to it. All right, we have some reflections coming into the chat bar here. Similar to CBT, yes. For therapists out there who are familiar, parents familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, that there is a lot of interweaving of various therapies, right? And we're going to talk about mindfulness later and the integration of that. Cognitive behavioral therapy works around the premise that thoughts are very closely connected with behaviors, and that if we can identify the thoughts, right, that's what does it tell you, right? That is the thought that comes with the feeling of stress. Now we can examine more objectively that thought, assess whether or not it is true, and we can also meet the needs of it and maybe even create, and I don't think I talk about it so much in this workshop, but we can even invite in helpful responses. Is there a character that could come and say something that would be encouraging or reassuring, which is creating replacement thoughts? So absolutely, a lot of integration of various therapies. Removing or separating the stressors from the students. I got acceptance of my stressor. Yes, that's actually one of the one thing I think in general, which is helpful in teaching social emotional skills with children, is not to teach them how to choose happiness, but how to teach them to be emotionally flexible. And I say that kind of laughing because I'm sure that's not unfamiliar, that term, choose happiness, just choose happiness, right? Just be grateful. You know, anger is a choice, worry is a choice. Well, it's not really, it's a human experience. But once it comes, then we can practice tools and techniques creatively to be able to accept our feelings and learn from our feelings in order to resolve our feelings, right? So I'm a big advocate of teaching emotional flexibility instead of teaching what we call emotional bypassing, which is ignore the feelings and just try to be happy instead, right? Good reflection to keep calm, help to focus. Exploration of feelings reduces the severity of them. Yeah, just like a visitor, right? If somebody's pounding on your door because they want sugar and you're closing the curtains and pretending that you're not home, I mean, maybe eventually like a neighbor would give up, but if it was like your annoying Aunt Jane, right? Like she probably isn't going to go away. She's going to start knocking on the window. She's going to go around the back. She's going to see, like, I know you're in there, right? Feelings aren't going to go away really until we address them and acknowledge and say, hey, I see why you're here. And then they kind of go, oh, good. Oh, okay. I don't have to work so hard now. Right. And kids get that. Kids get that. Got more stress first and then calmer thinking about what it needed. Control versus what can't be controlled. Oh, we're going to talk about that a little bit more, Audrey. Thank you for that. Release, use anxiety, process, gave ability to slow down, name it, call out the lie or the fear. Yeah, and then process a solution. Absolutely. Yep. Asking if it was true helped me realize that there is no evidence that it is true. I had to break down the task, helpful for me to take the approach of starting from a color. Good. I'm really glad that I walked you through that, Brianne, and everybody, because that's not an uncommon one where people go, well, I don't know. So we can just break it down and still say, what does it look like, right? We'll just start with a color. What color is it? And Jessica had a stress monster that looks so silly that I found myself laughing. Yes. And that's going to come up later on again when we talk about altering the image and how we can use humor with that. Here's another doodle dump on the left side here. My son did this doodle dump. My kids now sometimes, not always, but because they've learned over the years that this is helpful, that sometimes they will just go and draw and find that to be a releasing activity for themselves. So if we do this and we repeat this, not only are we helping in the moment, but we are teaching children that this is a life skill, that they can go and use various forms of art in order to help themselves understand themselves and in order to help them to contain their emotions and calm down, right, in the moment, so that they can, again, access those thinking, problem solving, nice, healthy, you know, cortex, frontal cortex skills that are still coming online until we're about 25 years old, in case you don't know that fact there, right? That one always blows my mind, that the thinking part of the brain, I'm of course like overly minimizing or simplifying it, but when I say the thinking part of the brain, because of course everything communicates, but that cortex that is primarily responsible for thinking, problem solving, planning, prioritizing, organizing, that's not fully developed until we're about 25 years old. Okay, it's good to remember. I try to remind myself that on a daily basis when I get frustrated at my kids for losing things, forgetting things again, not getting it, not, you know, like, why am I still having to remind you again every day? You do this. Oh, yeah, because your cortex isn't fully developed, right? Makes sense. Okay, so we can provide containment in other ways as well, not only with just the paper or a shape, but we can fold paper. Right? We can put it in an envelope. We can tape it up. We can staple it, right? And so doing some sort of a scribble even. I'm just checking the time here. Let's do, well, I'll just speak to this and then we'll move on because I have other activities I like to do. But if you'd like to on your own or while I'm talking, just do a scribble and then see what happens when you fold it, right? Just to give it a little bit of container. right? To put it away someplace. Where would you like to put it now? Okay. So that we don't just have these feelings that are now out and then what do I do with it? Right now we can put them away. And you can see the parallel, like in a class, for example, any of you who are teachers or parents at home, right? That sometimes we do need to put feelings away just for a moment, right? And that we can come back to them later, right? So maybe we're all coming into the classroom with stuff that happened this morning, stuff that happened this whole last year. Some of you who are maybe going back into the classroom, kids in the morning, if they're having big feelings, okay, let's just put the feeling on the paper. And then for now, we're gonna put it away. And after school, we can come back to it and we can open it back up. And then we can see if we can learn a little bit more about that feeling, okay? Compartmentalizing, right? We can also build internal resources in order to help soothe stress and anxiety. So this goes back to what we were talking before with the hand, where we can identify things around us or in our world, people, places that give us a sense of ease, right? But we can also focus on resources inside of us. And the way to explain that to children are like your skills, your strengths, what people like about you, your personality, things you like to do even, right? For younger kids, they might need things a little bit more concrete. And that we can do a body outline and see where those things live inside of us so we can access them, right? It's kind of like knowing where the first aid is in case we have an emergency. If you don't know where your first aid is, it's going to be hard to find it when you're in the middle of an emergency, right? And so we can create these, some sort of a form and map out visually where our internal strengths live. All right. So I'm going to invite you to do this one right now, actually briefly. And so if you would like to draw a very simple, this is a printout. I did not draw this. I will draw one right now so that you can see that we can just do. And if you're a stick figure person, that is fine. I'm going to show kind of like a stick figure person real quickly so that there is no or minimal concern about, there we go, about aesthetics, not worried about aesthetics. Okay, so it can be as simple as this, right? So go ahead, and if you would prefer, you can draw some other kind of a shape if you're not feeling the body shape. And then once you have your body outline or shape or body-ish, we can call it a body-ish shape, to start thinking about your strengths, your resources inside, the things that help you to get through the day. My daughter here, this was made by my daughter. She included, gosh, I wish I would have written it down because I'm trying to remember now. I know she said love. The eyes were her sharp eyes. My husband always tells the kids they have sharp eyes. I think that's because my husband doesn't see very well. So he's really reinforced that in the kids, like, oh, you found it. You've got really sharp eyes. So she said, these are my sharp eyes. The waves are her smartness. She put her smartness there, and then she has her love. I know one of these were her speed. I think that was maybe the lightning bolt was her speed. She's creative in her hands. The diamonds, I recall she said, were treasures that she has that she doesn't even know what they are yet. Those were her treasures yet to be discovered. And I think that's helpful too. If you have a child or you work with a child who really doesn't know what their strengths are, then it's a really good opportunity to think, well, what would somebody else say? Well, let's ask somebody else. You have another person around, or if nothing else, can we add some things, because we know there's some special things inside of you. Let's go ahead and just add shapes first. And then once we add the shapes to represent those resources, then we can start to get curious to see if we can identify what they are, right? So work it in reverse. All right. So again, let's take a moment to use the chat bar to share any thoughts, experiences about this process. So what you noticed during this process. And while you're doing that, I'll speak a little bit about how you can then use this, right? For certain children, you can post it up in their room. If this is a child at home, they can tape it on their desk. And then you can refer back to it and say, looks like you're having a hard time right now. I wonder if one of your treasures or one of your first aid or one of your resources, whatever you want to call it, can help you right now. Can you show me which one of these might be helpful right now? And then they can point to it. So you can actually use it in the moment. Okay, diamonds being unknown resources, abilities. It's too cute, yeah. They come up with the greatest things, don't they, kids? Help to remember that I have resources. That's right. I have a question. Oh, would you recommend doing this with the student or talking to them as they draw and watching them happen? So you can do either. You can do any of those. So you can actually do it too, and then share yours and say, these are the things that, as an example, these are the things that, that help me to be the teacher that I am, if you're a teacher, or these are the things that help me, or that I feel good about myself, that sometimes I use if I'm feeling stressed. So you can model that. You can also just walk around and non-verbally respond just by smiling and noticing. And if it's one-on-one, sometimes I will ask the individual, if I have thoughts or I have like an impulse to kind of talk to them, I will ask them, is it okay if I talk to you, or is it better if I wait so that you can concentrate, right? So that you kind of have some quiet time. Because I think that quiet self-reflection time and then looking for the nonverbal cues if they need some assistance can also be really important, right? So identifying strengths and fostering feelings of possibility, increasing confidence, colors of paints through my fingers and arms, positive energy. Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, so we're going to move on to part 3 now. Transforming, here we go. For those of you who had gone to the head of the class and you were already altering your images, right? So this is huge. This was actually an insight that I had from my own childhood experience, which was when I would have scary dreams, or just more like visual images before I go to sleep. Like I'd lay there at night and I'd think of things. And my mother would say to me, well, imagine a giant eraser and just start at one side and erase it all the way across until it's all the way gone. So I would do this, but the problem was, and it worked until it was gone, and then it would go pop and it would just pop right back in again. And I'd start over and I'd start erasing it again and it'd go pop. And then I start over, but it kept coming back. But there was something that, I thought, gosh, my mom was really onto something, that she has some kind of idea that we can use visual imagery to combat visual imagery. And what happened then was my son, my oldest, when he was really little, he was terrified that there was gophers in his closet. And so, totally irrational. So I did what I think most parents would do. I tried to rationalize with him, which was, spoiler alert, it was totally ineffective, right? So he's in, imaginative, emotional, 3-year-old brain. And here I am as a parent trying to rationalize with him, like, look, gophers don't live in closets. We live on the 2nd floor of an apartment building. There's no way a gopher could have gotten up here. Gophers live in dirt. Let's look in the closet. See, look, no gophers, right? But none of that was effective. So then what I decided to do was I just thought, well, I'll experiment and say, I said, well, you know what? I said, I wonder what those gophers look like. And he started describing them. And I said, I wonder, and at the time I sort of guided this. I didn't ask him to do it this time himself, but I said like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if they were having a party? And he started to kind of chuckle. And I said, what would they wear to the party? And he said, they all have little party hats on. And I said, well, what else? And he said, oh, they have like little bow ties and things like that. And it really completely transformed his feeling about it. And he was perfectly fine having a gopher party in his closet. He just wasn't okay with having scary gophers in his closet, right? And so then I started using this strategy with my other kids and giving them sort of more space rather than saying like, oh, what if they were having a party? I just started giving them more space. So this was one with my daughter. Actually, she was having a scary image, and I said, well, how can you make it silly? Would you like to change the picture? You can use the power of your imagination and creativity to change this. And so she gave it a mustache and that funny top hat, and her imagination. You could draw it also, but this was typically done with my kids at night when they were already tucked in for bed, and then they're going, Mom, I can't go to sleep. I'm thinking of something scary. And so we would go through this process. And then I would check with her and say, so how is it now? And she says, it's still scary. And I say, okay, so what, let's keep changing it. How's it now? It's still scary. I said, okay, so what's still scary? And she said, the mouth is really scary. And I said, well, how can you take care of that? And she started laughing and laughing. And she said, I just took his mouth away. He doesn't even have a mouth now. And then she was fine. She was absolutely fine, right? So we try to rationalize with fears and anxiety. It's going to be really difficult to get anywhere. If we tell a child to calm down, it's not real, don't worry about it. We're not speaking to anxiety. We're speaking to the child, and it's okay to try to reassure the child, but we're not actually speaking to the emotional part of the brain, which is for some reason perceiving that there's a threat. Right. And going back to the very beginning of the presentation, when we talked about the thinking part of the brain and the feeling part of the brain and how they don't talk to each other in childhood, and under stress and anxiety, it's even harder for thinking brain to talk to feeling brain. And we can explain this to children also, right? About thinking brain and feeling brain and how they talk to each other. So we have to speak the language of the amygdala. We have to speak the language of the emotional brain, right? So we use rhythm and music and movement and imagery, right? Now, of course, you'll notice today I'm alluding to music and movement and things like that. I am a visual art therapist, and so that is where my sort of primary skills and inclinations live. In our book, The Innovative Parent, we do share a lot more movement-based, rhythm-based, and I say movement, rhythm, and music-based interventions to use with children, because my co-author Ping Ho is a drummer and does a lot of therapeutic drumming curriculum, and so she brings that sort of rhythm, movement, music piece to. All right. This is one of your handouts. If you received that, or if you want to check back for it later, the one on the left, we have, or maybe you're going to be getting it after this. I don't know. April, did they receive this yet? Or are they going to get it later today?
It was in the welcome email and the reminder email.
Okay, great. So you already got this. The spheres of concern. So you can look for that in the emails. And let's take a moment right now. If you happen to have it printed out, great, you can use it. If you don't worry about it. You can just draw 3 concentric circles and write control, influence, and concern. So this goes into L, right, in calm, in our acronym CALM. So L is for letting go of what we cannot control. Okay, and there's lots of ways to do that. We talked before about containing, folding. We can even fold things into origami cranes. And do something ritualistic to kind of like throw it in the air, or make a paper airplane and throw it away, throw it something in the trash can, right? That we can do movements with the art that we create to release it physically, or to create a ritual around it to let go of it in some way. We can also do by reflecting on what we do and don't have control over, because that can help us to let go of what we can't control. So take a moment now to fill in your spheres of control on your own. Or like I said, go ahead and just draw 3 concentric circles, writing control, influence, and concern. So in the middle, we have the things that I can control, right? This is what I can control. I'm going to show you. If you want to make it like a bullseye, that's fine. It doesn't have to, okay? All right, it's on the back of the person one, right? So you can just do a little bullseye if you want. Okay, so what I have control over, my son said he can control himself, his toys, and his imagination. And then he just made some little doodles. He doesn't actually think he can control the wind or the sea. Those are just little doodles. Okay, the next sphere is influence, what you can influence. So he said that he can influence his siblings, he can influence global warming, his friends, and his parents. Yes, he has a lot of influence over his parents. He's very good at influencing us. And then the last sphere, the outside sphere, is the sphere of concern. And my son wrote coronavirus and time, that he has no influence or control over these things, but that he can just be concerned about them. He can have concerns about them. So thinking for yourself right now, what things in your life do you have control over? What do you have no control over, but you can influence? And what can you neither control nor influence, but that you might be concerned about or hold concern for? All right, and I'm going to ask for one volunteer. You can feel free to keep working on this if you'd like to. Let's see here. One volunteer to share their spheres of control and influence. Feel free to just unmute and say me, because it's hard to see everybody. I think I'm on 4 different screens here. Maybe you need a little bit more time. I'll answer this question in the chat bar while somebody is thinking about getting brave and sharing theirs. So somebody asked, do you find that a lot of people have no idea where the strengths live in their body or even what they are when they are stressed? So that is a very abstract concept. And so depending on your child or the children with whom you work, that could be confusing. Some people are very literal, adults as well. I have some adults with whom I work where I might say, you know, we'll give it a, you know, what color would it be if it were a color? And they look at me like, what in the world are you talking about a color? So what I might do with that individual then is say, well, can you see the word? Right? Can you just picture the word? Well, yeah, I can picture the word. Okay, what's the font? What's the font look like? Right? Well, it's in big, bold letters. Okay. Does it have like a shadow? Is it like 3-dimensional? Is it flat? Right? Now we can start giving imagery to it. Right? Is it cursive? Is it right? And so then we can get a little bit more feeling from what that word is to that person. And so the idea of it living in the body, if the person really, if it really doesn't make sense to them, that's okay. If they're very literal about it, like love is in my heart, thinking's, you know, smarts are in my brain, that's fine. If they really don't know, you can also use that strategy. It's okay, you don't know, you can just put it anywhere. Because sometimes just being spontaneous and then upon reflection, then they start to notice things that they might not have realized while they're sitting there trying to think about it. You can say, just put it anywhere on the page. And if they want to list it in the upper left-hand corner, that's fine too, right? Okay. Anybody like to share their spheres of control? It's okay if not.
I can. My little hand raised here.
Dan, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Put my video on. Hi, thank you so much, by the way. This has been amazing.
Wow, thanks.
So I put for things that I can control, breath. I always find breathing, like as you already mentioned, can calm me down and sort of take a moment to be like, okay, what's actually going on in this situation, and give me a little pause. I can control my own planning, because oftentimes I feel like, oh, I should have planned this out better. I would have been less stressed or whatever. But if I take time before, whatever, if I'm trying to do an activity with kids or something, if I really take the time to plan it out, I feel less stressed. In my own education, doing things like this, because I often suffer from imposter syndrome where, I'm like, well, I'm not the person to do this kind of thing. But like, if I feel educated, then I can back myself up a little bit and be like, well, no, I do know what I'm talking about. And look at these things I've done. Things I can influence relationships, whether that's interpersonal or with children or whatever, the stronger the relationship you have with the kids, the more receptive they are, and makes you just feel more confident in all those things. I can influence my career. I can, try and seek out opportunities, and believe in myself in those places. And every new thing that I do in my career gives me more control and more opportunities. Things of concern, timing. You can't really control the timing of things. We don't know when coronavirus is going to feel like it's actually over, or when one opportunity ends or another begins. Other people's perception of you can't control. You can try and influence, but you can't really control it. So if somebody does think I'm not qualified or worthy or something, sometimes you can't control that. In my own limitations, I always am concerned that something is going to stop me in small moments or big moments where I don't handle the situation right, or I get overwhelmed, or I lose a little bit of self-control or something like that. That's always kind of floating around in the background as well.
Yeah, thank you. And looking at the whole now, I'm curious, when you look at the whole piece, is there anything that stands out to you as a whole?
I feel like it's easy to kind of go back to the control, go back to the hub in a way, and just be like, yes, the outer rings are there, but they're sort of always there. But the most important part is sort of the hub. And then I also am encouraged by the influence section as well. And even though the concern is technically the biggest circle there, it also feels like, in that sense, kind of the furthest away.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that observation. I'm going to use that in the future too, that in workshops, because I actually had not thought of that. So your observation of looking at that is the furthest away. That's actually really useful to bring maybe even conceptually to people's attention if you're using this with students or with other children, right? What does it feel like if you can imagine yourself sitting in the hub? How far away does that feel now? And how do you feel when you're sitting in the hub, right? Around the things that you control on. Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks so much, Dan. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Okay, I'm going to bring my screen back up here. One thing that we can do also with this activity is we can get very specific. Dan shared a lot of examples that were career related. So we could even, I left it very open to fill whatever you wanted to. You can see my son used, everything from imagination and toys to global warming and coronavirus. But we could even say very specifically, like a child has a conflict with a peer. Thinking about this situation, this conflict, what do you have control over? What do you have influence over? And what do you have concern over, right? Thinking just about coronavirus, right? My son put concern that he has no control or influence. But if I did this again with him and said, now let's just do coronavirus, I guarantee you that he could come up with things that he does have control over, such as whether or not he wears a mask, right? He does have control over that, right? Influence, he might feel like he has influence over his friends, right? For example. Right. And concern, well, he'll probably say that he has concern just over other people's choices that he can't control or influence, right? For example. So we can get very specific about a specific stressor or a specific anxiety that that child might be experiencing in their life. All right. So finally, accessing our own internal resources and getting ourselves back into the zone of regulation, right? So what I found very interesting thinking about this was that when we're in our zone of regulation, we tend to be more creative, curious, and compassionate. And when I think about all of the research out there about how do we help people get into the zone of regulation most effectively and efficiently, it tends to be through activities and practices that engage us in creative, curious, and compassionate practices, right? So we are both curious, creative, and compassionate when we're in the zone, and those very experiences bring us back into the zone as well, okay? So one way to do this, so here's our M in our CALM acronym, CALM. So is that we can be mindful. So I'm going to invite you right now to look around your room, wherever you are, and to find a color that catches your eye. Looking for something that is either pleasant color to look at. It doesn't have to be a favorite color, just in this moment. Feels pleasant. For some people, pleasant is a difficult feeling to access, actually, if you have a very depressed individual. But we can also go for just neutral. And when I say neutral, I don't mean like taupe and beige, although it could be that. What I mean by neutral is that it feels neutral. It's neither pleasant nor unpleasant. It's just fine. Okay, so looking for a color right now in your environment that is either neutral or pleasant to look at. And I'm going to do this as well. And once you find that color, just spend a little time looking at that color. So we're going to bring a mindful stance to this color by just being present with it in this moment without judging, noticing if our mind gets distracted or wanders, and then bring it back to the color. And if you'd like to get a little bit of playfulness in this, you can now hold that color in mind and start to look around the room and see if you can find that color anywhere else. You could even look outside a window if you'd like to. So searching for your color elsewhere in your environment. All right, and now taking just a couple moments to put in the chat bar what that experience was like for you. You can take 15 seconds. I mean, that was not that long. That was probably less than a minute, right? You could do this at the start of the day. You can do this at the dinner table. You can do this, for a lot of people, dinner time is actually a pretty high conflict time in the household. So you can start dinner with this when everyone's sitting down. You can start a class period with this. Connected, calm, joyful, calming, pleasing, right? I notice every time I do that activity, the body just starts to breathe itself. I just end up taking a deep breath on its own. I don't even need to try to make it come, right? Comforting, made me smile, helps you focus and be positive, easy, bright, and calming. It's very easy to do, right? Occasionally, people will say, I was worried I was doing it wrong, and it made me anxious, okay? But that also is information. If a child tells you that, well, that's a pretty good clue that they struggle with that, right? That if looking for a color, their environment makes them anxious because they're worried they're doing it wrong, right? Then that's something for us to pay attention to, that they might be very concerned in their life about doing things correctly, right? I'm calming to see my favorite color. I also get a little burst of it almost feels like a little reward. Like every time I find it, when I look for it, I'm like, oh, I found it again, yay me, yay. Yeah. It's like a completely like I get a little hit of like dopamine where I'm like, oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. So that's why I have the stack of laundry here on the right, just to exemplify sort of colors in our environment and how just using very simple everyday objects, if we pay attention to it and find a little pleasantness in it, that it can actually be a very calming experience. And on the left here is a contour line drawing, which contour line drawing is when you draw the edge of an object. This here is a portrait, of course. Well, I don't know if it's of course. I think you can tell it's a portrait. That my neighbor actually did for me as an example. And you don't pick up your pencil. You just follow the edge. You just follow the edge around the shape or the object. And you don't have to do it with a piece of paper. You could have the child draw, or you can simply do it by looking and using your finger to trace around. I use these strategies a lot in my therapy practice. I use it with adults, I use it with kids, I use it with teens. Let's take a moment, find something that's pleasant or neutral to look at, and let's just draw around the edge of it, okay? And let's all do that together right now, just so you have the example or the experience of doing that. So finding any object in your environment that catches your eye or is pleasant or neutral to look at. And we're just going to take a moment and let the eye wander around. If you want to use paper and pencil, that's fine. And just going all the way around the object. And if you get done with the outside, you can move to the inside details, finding shapes and lines to trace around. And then all the way back. Okay. So one of the things that's happening in the brain when we do this, when we're talking about anxiety or other types of stress responses, is it's telling the brain that we're okay. When we're looking around the room to find an object or a color, even that process is activating what's called the orienting response, which tells the brain, oh, there's no tiger here. I think I'm okay. We're scanning the environment very intentionally because we're looking for an object or a color, and that's sending unconscious messages to the brain that is tasked with appraising threat and telling it, look, I see no danger, okay? So that's one way that we're talking to that part of the brain in that moment. Then when we're focusing on something pleasant or neutral, we're sending more signals to the brain that, look, this is pleasant, this is neutral, this is okay, we're okay, right? And it brings us out of the past or future-oriented thinking and just right here, right now, right? So there's a whole lot going on in those 10, 15 seconds that can be incredibly regulating, and why it's so useful for adults to know it, to use it yourselves, right? To be able to just take a moment, find a color, right? And then intervene with your children. Right? Teaching in a classroom, look around, take a moment, do it with the whole class, right? If you're feeling like you need it, like everybody, let's take a moment, find a color from your seats, look around, find your favorite color, find a color that you like to look at. Once you have that color, let's stop. And then you could do it with them so that you're also regulating your system at the same time, right? We're all under a lot of stress all the time, every day. Not all the time, but every day for sure. Stressors all day. Right. We just have a couple more slides here. I know that April said we're going to have 15 minutes for questions. I know we're going to be bumping up against 12 o'clock hour here Pacific time. I will be staying afterwards to take more questions if you have them, just to let you know. But if you do need to leave at 12, feel free to log off. Take care of yourselves if you need to go at that time. Okay. Here's another online adaptation. In terms of refocusing and grounding when we're on an online platform. So some people have been playing with the fun backgrounds, right? And so we can even use those and put up backgrounds for some children. Maybe their home environments are very chaotic. Maybe it's hard to find something that is pleasant to look at in their environment, or there's too many cues that they're not safe in their environment. And so using your background as a cue. Let's take a look at this background that I put up today. This would be, for teachers, for therapists, You know, kids can even vote on what background they want to put up. Or also, like I said, if you're distanced from family members, this could be a fun game to play with the children that you might be communicating with. If you don't have virtual backgrounds, I've talked to some people who have actually like created like drawings or put other things behind them, or invited children to do that, right? Drawing their own backgrounds to hang up behind them if they're still online. And here is an example of what we can do with poetry, actually, just to throw in a little poetry something for y'all. So this is a haiku that follows the 5-7-5 syllable format. I was actually yesterday in my garage with my son, and they've been doing haikus recently. And so then we started making up haikus about other things just in our life, right? And so it's a good way, especially for my oldest one that was, you know, if I say, well, how was school? And he goes, like, oh, right? And then I might start to make up a haiku about it, right? Like, doesn't know what, huh? I think he had some fun. He wants it hidden. Right? And it can just be like kind of a playful game. And then he might respond with a haiku, right? Didn't get PE. Teacher called me out in class. Glad to be home now. Right? And so it's a way to communicate and express things as well about the day, stresses, anxieties, and whatnot. Or in this example here, we can use it to refocus and ground, just like we use the mindfulness techniques where we can focus on something pleasant and then create a all right, so I'm going to end with a little visualization. While we do this, I invite you to leave your eyes open. If you're more comfortable doing that, you can close your eyes if you want to. Get into a comfortable position. And this is going back to finding our own internal resources. And this has to do, we didn't talk a lot about this. This is a bit like altering. This can go under A for altering the image. And with altering the image, we can do all kinds of things. We can not just change the image, but we can zoom in and zoom out. And there was actually that nice example with the spheres of influence, how we can zoom out from the things we don't have control by getting back to the hub, right? We can zoom in to the things we have control over. Okay, so altering the image isn't just changing the image, but it can be zooming in and zooming out, depending if we want to feel closer to that thing and investigate it more, or if we want to feel further away from it, so that's a little bit more tolerable, right? Like we did with the externalizing the stress. Okay, so I'm going to guide you in this little visualization, and then I'm going to take some questions. Okay, so I'm going to invite you to start with just a sense of hope, being able to hold hope in your hand. Okay, I did this with an individual who told me that it felt so small that it felt like a grain of sand. Okay, that hope was as small as this grain of sand. But I'm going to allow you in this context just to think of if you could hold hope in your hand, just get it sort of a sense, and I'm going to do this with you right now. If you want to put your hand in front of you like I am, it kind of helps me to just really visualize that. Okay, so just picturing hope. Giving it a color, a shape, a form, a texture. And then whenever you have a sense of that, start to zoom in. So you can imagine getting closer to it and holding it up, or you can imagine actually holding a magnifying glass or putting it under a microscope. So start to zoom into that image. Allowing your mind to get curious about this object in your hand. Noticing the details of the shape and the texture. Maybe even going all the way inside of it, seeing what's on the inside of it. And then allowing yourself to slowly, gently come back out to where you're just holding it in your hand again. And if you would like to imagine where you would like to keep this object, you can keep it inside of your body. You can put it in your pocket. You can imagine putting it in a container. Considering where you'd like to keep it so you know where it is in case you want to come back to it. Knowing that it's there and accessible for you anytime. And then whenever you're ready, in whatever way feels comfortable to you, you can start to reorient to the room. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me today. This is such a pleasure. This fills my bucket to be able to share this information with such a wide variety of people from all over, working to, whether it's with your own family or in a professional context, improve your lives and the lives of children. Here's some information about the Innovative Parent. Basically, you can get it anywhere that books are sold. We have like them listed here, but here's some contact information about UCLA Arts and Healing. There's my personal professional website, therapywitherica.com. If you're interested in subscribing to my newsletter, I send it out quarterly with upcoming workshops, podcasts that I appear on. And I always include 1, 2, or 3 new creative activities around some sort of a social or emotional theme. So that's subscribe.therapywitherica.com/connect. You also just go to my website, you'll get a pop-up to subscribe to the newsletter. You can go to the contact page and scroll down, and there's a button there that you can click on as well. And last but not least, these are our upcoming trainings with UCLA Arts and Healing. And I would be happy to take any questions. I did pretty good, actually. It's just 12 o'clock now. So I ended on time. And if it's okay, April, I'll stick around and take questions. Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to thank, for the people that do need to leave, I just want to thank you for coming. And please keep in touch with Erica. I'll also be sending out an email with that information as well. And with the survey, I put the survey in the chat, but I'll send that out as well.
I'm just checking the chat bar right now. Lots of thank yous. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
There was a question from Kara Anton. Is there an average amount of time that it takes to activate the orienting response?
You know, I don't know the research on that. It's an interesting question. In my anecdotal experience, and it's hard to know also, right, because there's so much going on there. Like if it's that's happening and that's being activated, or a combination of everything. But I don't know the specific information, but I can tell you, for example, I mean, within seconds, I've seen people who were in in my clinical work, people who were in very depressive states. I mean, in a state so dissociated and cut off, the freeze state, what we would call that freeze, where she was, I'm thinking of one particular individual, she was really ready to get up and leave, and she wanted to kill herself. And I invited her to do exactly what we just did, was like, well, let's not talk about what happened. Let's just take a moment and just look around the room. Anything in here, you know, catch your eye? And she's like, yeah, I like that right there. And it was a tapestry. So we started describing it and looking at the colors, and she started asking me questions about it. And the color came back to her face. She sat up, her digestion came back online, her stomach started growling. She was able to tell me she was hungry. I was able to get her some food. And then she took a deep breath and she said, I don't really want to kill myself, Erica. And that was, I mean, within maybe like a minute. Now, of course, there were deeper things there that we needed, but in terms of like a quick shift in state of internal state and nervous system regulation, it can happen fairly quickly. Any other questions? I'm going to stop the share right now. Let me know if you need me to put it back up, but this way I can see everybody. There's a couple questions for you, April, I think, about certificates. Here's one from Kim. I'm a little confused about this. You said making a space for the stress, the container, instead of distracting from it. You also commented that you shocked your son out of the moment of stress by, I believe, distracting him. Okay, so let me speak a little bit more about distraction. So distraction can be used skillfully, right? Distraction is actually a skill that we can use skillfully. But when we use distraction repeatedly to avoid or ignore and not return to address the emotion, it's problematic. And so that's what we see a lot with kids and adults now, right? Is I'm feeling something, so I'm going to get on my phone and scroll. I'm going to go binge watch Netflix. I'm going to, but I'm not going to return to it. I'm just going to make myself focus on something else momentarily or even for a prolonged period of time. The idea of getting into a state of, and I think what I was talking about in terms of like shocking my son in the moment, like when we try something novel, like, oh, let's do this. Instead, it's kind of like, what? That it engages the brain so that we can address what's going on rather than distract and ignore and then not return or resolve. Okay? Does that clarify, Kim? Great. Thank you. Thanks for asking that question. That was important. Any other questions? Or anything you didn't like, anything else you didn't get, that's fine too. I invite all comments and questions. Sometimes people say like, well, yeah, well, what about, you know, I've had teachers before be like, what would you do if a kid throws a chair? Try that one, Erica, you know. So I'm open to it all. In my class, transitioning students off of their computers and onto paper, oh yeah, often triggers negative feelings, anxiety. Any advice? I'm curious, so we can get even more specific about what you think might be triggering. It can be helpful, not necessary, but helpful to know if, for example, because I'm wondering if it's because they feel less competent in writing, for example, or if it's just because there's preferred, if there's more preferred things going on the computer and then less preferred. And so that's something maybe to think about more specifically that you could address. I don't know if you want to unmute and share a little bit more about that. Is it Lucy? Okay, yeah, so the computer is more preferred and more distracting. Yeah, and then what kind of activities are you typically transitioning to with the paper pencil?
Insurance. Oops.
Oh, Lala, I think you unmuted on accident. Right, because one thing that comes to mind, for example, Lucy, without knowing more details, is that if what you're transitioning is like, okay, now we're going to put away the computers and we're going to transition to math homework or a writing activity where we're going to write a paragraph, what you might want to start with as a transitional piece is we're going to start with a drawing or we're going to start with a scribble so that you're already getting the pencil in the hand and we're getting the paper out, but we're transitioning to a maybe more preferred or fun or playful activity using the pencil and the paper. And then now the computers are closed. We're doing a scribble, or we can even start the scribble while we're closing the computer, right? And now we're gonna decorate the scribble or transform the scribble into something. What kind of pictures do you see in the scribble? Okay, great. Now get out another piece of paper and we're gonna put our scribbles over here and we're gonna share them after we do a couple math problems, for example. Okay, so that would be one suggestion that you could try. Brianne says, I'm left thinking about how to integrate culturally relevant practices with all of the rich information shared today. Yes. Do you have any thoughts on this or other practitioners' resources that I can check out? Absolutely. So, and I tried to speak a little bit to that in terms of with various, one, just being very open and not making assumptions. When we're talking about art, for example, is an important piece in terms of cultural sensitivity, that our brains make meaning so fast. It's ridiculous how quickly we think we know what's going on in another person's head or even in a drawing. So asking them what their experience is, asking them what the meaning for them is behind something in a non-judgmental way. Also, we talked about the backgrounds, right? That for some kids that in their environments, they might not have a lot of cues of safety, or it might be hard to find. And so we could, give them, they can create something at school to take home with them, and that can sit in their room or wherever they do their homework, or they can carry that with them as a bit of like a transitional object. We didn't talk about that when we're going into different environments. But also being sensitive to, what might be happening in different people's homes if we're on Zoom, and the idea that, all kids are going to have, a fancy background isn't necessarily true. And so that the teacher can use their own background instead and let kids vote on that and so forth. We do in our social emotional arts, April, you can speak to this. I don't remember when is it on See on a Shoestring when Denise and I teach challenging behaviors online. We do a lot of cultural sensitivity training in that one. And then Denise Boston does a specific one, I believe. Can you speak to that, April?
I haven't been on those programs yet, so I'm not sure. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so if you want to check out UCLA Arts and Healing, I know there's some other programs, and Denise Boston has newly been teaching for us this last year, and she does a lot on integration of culturally sensitive material, even more specifically, and so you might want to check out her work as well. Okay, so I hope that that was sort of a broad kind of overview there. I know that there's a lot. I think also in terms of showing images, that's an important one. If you're an art teacher, for example, it does surprise me how many folks are still, leaning on sort of like the white European male experience of art and images, even in very culturally diverse classrooms, and that is going to make it difficult for kids to engage. I had a student once who shared her experience of going into a classroom to, I think she was like an intern or something, and she said that the kids were so disengaged. They were primarily African-American male population, and the teacher was teaching European white male art. And she made some suggestions about more diverse arts and arts that were more relatable culturally, and how the kids got really excited and engaged. So when we think about music, when we think about dance, when we think about visual arts, that we're thinking, in terms of cultural inclusion. All right, let me see what other questions are here. With the circles of control, would you ever start from the concern and move towards control? Yes, absolutely, Stephanie. You can start with what are your concerns and then move towards control. And that can be done even very intentionally in terms of focusing people more and more in towards a sense of what some people might experience as like a safer place. Like I feel safer when I feel like I have control and influence, rather than ending in, oh my gosh, I have no control or influence. So if you do go from in to out, that it could be useful to check with people about their experience. Some people find it very freeing, like to go, wow, I don't have any control or influence in this. And that can be a very relieving feeling. Other people, that might make them anxious. And so then reminding them to come back to control, right? So you can do either, but also with the understanding that because different people will have different emotional responses to it, that we can just check to see where people are so that they are feeling more contained. What I will also do with the outer sphere is let people know that even though we don't have control or influence, that people have practices. You know, we as a society, as cultures, have created practices so that if we feel like we don't have control or influence, that there still are things that we can do. And that might be in some within some families, that might be prayer, right? And in some traditions that might be sending well wishes, right? That or even just saying like, oh, I hope that they, you know, like sending positive energy. That those are things in different families and different traditions that people can actually do and practice when they don't have direct control or influence. And I will remind people of that as well. I got an awesome, thanks, Brian. April sending you guys some info about the social emotional arts. Great, thanks, Brianne. Hope to see you in the social emotional arts program. Dan, it could be an interesting activity to draw something they perceive as negative related to personal culture and then alter it. Yeah, absolutely. Talking about, I mean, lessons in, you know, reading images, cultural biases, prejudices, thinking, you know, having a classroom discussion about that, doing a visual response to the discussion. And then would you like to change the image? What could help the image? What does the image need? Any of those questions. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Okay. Any other questions? The chat, I think I got through all the chats in the chat bar. Any final questions? Going. Thanks, Stephanie. Good to see you again. Thank you. All right. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, everybody. Thanks again to April for adminning today. And I hope that you all find at least a couple activities that you can put into practice this week with the children in your life. And hopefully I will see you again sometime in the future. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Erica.
Thanks, April. Bye.
Bye.